Okay, so ready to dive into something kind of cool.
Absolutely.
Today, we are all about getting ahead of the game with antecedent interventions.
All right.
Think of it as like preventative behavioral magic, right?
I like it.
We're cracking open Chapter 26 of Cooper's Applied Behavior Analysis.
Okay.
And trust me, this isn't just for, like, the academics out there.
Right.
Whether you're dealing with toddlers, teenagers, or even that colleague who replies all to every single email.
Oh, yeah.
This is going to be pretty eye-opening.
I think this is something that everybody struggles with at some point in some way, so.
Totally, yeah.
Yeah, this will be helpful.
What we're really doing here, and I love how Cooper puts it, is shifting from simply reacting to behavior to proactively shaping it.
Yeah, and that's what's so cool about antecedent interventions, right? It's like we're getting ahead of the game, like you said, instead of just dealing with the aftermath. We're looking at what's happening before a challenging behavior even pops up. So we can, like, set the stage for a smoother performance.
Yes. It's like less firefighting and more like proactive stage management.
Exactly. And I like that you're bringing up the stage management piece because it really applies across so many different settings.
Totally.
Like we can use these with, like you said, kids, adults, even like in workplace settings.
Absolutely.
So now Cooper, he breaks down these antecedent interventions in a couple of different ways.
Okay.
We've got those function-based interventions where, you know, you're really trying to get at the why behind a behavior, addressing that root cause.
Okay.
And then we have, you know, our default interventions, which are more about making these like strategic adjustments to the environment without needing to go into like a deep dive of the behavior's motivation.
So it's like having like a specialized toolkit, but then also having your trusty Swiss Army knife.
I like that. Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
Because like you wouldn't use a screwdriver to hammer in a nail, right?
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, choosing the right intervention really depends on the situation.
Yeah.
How much we even understand about what's going on.
That's a really good point, actually. Because sometimes we don't know.
Right. Exactly.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
Like we can still use some of these tools even if we don't know the ins and outs of the behavior.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's the beauty of these default interventions. We're going to get to those, but they're really helpful when you're like, I don't know what's causing this, but I need something. I need a tool.
Yeah, like a quick fix. Sometimes.
Exactly.
Sometimes those are really valuable and important. Okay, so I'm already like kind of like my brain's going in a million different directions thinking about all this.
Yeah.
But I think let's get into some more specifics about these different interventions.
Okay, sounds good.
So let's talk about non-contingent reinforcement.
Okay.
Or as the cool kids call it, I guess.
Chuckle.
NCR.
NCR, yeah. It's a mouthful, so we shorten it. So what's the deal with this? I mean, it sounds very...
It sounds very technical.
Wow, very technical.
Yeah.
What is it?
Basically, imagine this. You're dealing with a kiddo who throws a tantrum to get attention.
Right.
Instead of just giving attention during the tantrum, right? With NCR, you're showering them with attention.
Ooh.
But on a regular schedule, no matter what they're doing.
So it's like preemptively filling their attention bucket so they're less likely to act out to get it?
You got it. You're preventing that need from even coming up in the first place.
Oh, that's really interesting. Okay.
And there was this really cool study that Cooper talks about.
Okay.
Using NCR with adults with developmental disabilities.
Okay.
And they were using it to try to decrease self-injurious behaviors and aggression.
Okay.
And so they were providing attention and food on this like fixed schedule, regardless of what the person was doing.
Wow. And what happened?
They saw a significant decrease in those challenging behaviors.
So it worked.
It did. Like, it sounds so simple, right?
Yeah.
But it's really about understanding, okay, what is it that's fueling this behavior?
Right, right.
And how can we get ahead of that need?
That's amazing. Okay.
So that's what NCR is all about.
So I'm curious, though, you mentioned different, I don't know, like flavors of NCR.
Right.
You said like positive reinforcement and escape.
Yes.
Even automatic reinforcement.
Yes.
So what's the difference and how do you know like which one to use?
That is a fantastic question. And honestly, it really depends on what's going on with the behavior, right? So if it's attention seeking, we might go with that positive reinforcement NCR.
Okay.
But let's say we've got a student who's acting out to get out of doing a math worksheet.
Oh, yeah, I can see that.
Right. They're like, I hate math. I'm just going to like make a scene and then maybe I can get out of it.
Totally.
So that's more of an escape behavior.
Oh.
And so in that case, we might use NCR escape, which could look like offering those planned breaks.
Oh, okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Right, because then we're getting ahead of that need for escape.
That's so smart. I love that.
Yeah, so we're always trying to match the strategy to what's going on.
What about automatic reinforcement, though? What is that?
Okay, so that one's a little different.
Okay.
It's when the behavior itself is rewarding.
What do you mean?
So think of like repetitive movements
Right.
or vocalizations that seem to have any external payoff.
Oh, okay.
Like it's not that they're trying to get attention. They're not trying to escape.
Oh, yeah.
They're just doing it because it feels good to them in some way.
Gotcha.
So in those cases, NCR is about like giving them other ways to get that stimulation in a more appropriate way.
So it's like redirecting in a way.
Yeah, it's like redirecting. It's like, hey, finding a replacement behavior, essentially.
Oh, that's so interesting. See, I think this is a perfect example of like how sometimes we think we're doing the right thing.
Right.
But we're actually unintentionally reinforcing negative behaviors.
Absolutely.
Because we're only giving attention when things escalate.
Yes, 100%. Like it's such a classic parenting pitfall.
Oh my gosh, all the time. Yes.
But it happens in so many other areas of life too.
Oh, yeah.
Like think about like in workplaces or even just in our own relationships.
Right. Absolutely.
We accidentally reinforce stuff all the time.
It's so true.
And then we're like, why does this keep happening?
Exactly.
But it's because we're actually feeding into it without realizing it.
Wow, that's really insightful. Okay, so I think I'm getting a much better grasp on NCR.
Okay, good.
I feel like we could talk about that all day, but
That check.
what other antecedent interventions are there? I need more tools.
Okay, well, let's talk about the high probability instructional sequence. We call that high pay for short because, again, yeah, it's a mouthful, right?
Right.
So high PEC is all about momentum.
Momentum. I'm intrigued. Tell me more. Tell me more about this because I like this. This sounds promising.
Okay, so imagine you're trying to get a child to do something that they typically resist, like putting away their toys.
Right.
Classic example.
Right. Yeah, the struggle is real.
So instead of just leading with that low probability request of clean up your toys,
right,
you're going to start with a series of high probability requests.
Okay.
Things they're more likely to do without a fuss.
Like what? Give me an example.
Okay. So give me 5. Touch your nose.
Okay.
Now let's put those toys back in the bin. So you're building that momentum.
So you're creating a yes streak.
Yes. Exactly.
Oh, that's really interesting.
And they're more likely to just go with the flow.
Oh, that's so smart.
And Cooper, he illustrates this with this example of a teacher who's trying to get their student to put on a shirt, which was, again, a low probability request.
No.
This kid did not like putting on his shirt.
Okay.
But before she asked him to do that, she had him do a bunch of things he loved to do, like give high fives, put a ball in a bucket.
Okay.
And guess what? By the time they got to the shirt, he was much more cooperative.
Wow. That's amazing.
It's like you're tricking their brain into cooperation.
Yeah, I love it.
Because you're building that positive momentum.
That's a really, really good strategy.
Yeah.
And I could see that being so helpful for like people who tend to be oppositional.
Yes.
Or prone to those escape behaviors like we were talking about.
Absolutely, yeah, because they're getting that positive reinforcement for engaging with you.
Yeah.
And so that escape behavior isn't as reinforcing anymore.
Right.
Because they're already getting something good.
That's so interesting. This whole momentum thing reminds me of like my own struggles with procrastination. Like if I can just break down a daunting task into smaller, like more manageable steps.
Right.
And celebrate those small wins.
Yes.
Then I'm so much more likely to get it done.
Exactly. You're creating your own high art sequence.
There you go. I'm using it in my own life. This is great.
Exactly. And that's what I love about all these principles is that they apply to all of us.
Totally.
Like even just thinking about like how can I motivate myself? How can I motivate my kids?
It's all connected.
It really is. It's all connected.
Okay, so we've got NCR. We've got the high art sequence under our belts. What other behavior change tools?
All right, let's talk about functional communication training, or FCT.
FCT.
Yeah, have you heard of this one?
I have heard of it. Yeah, give us like the rundown. What is this all about?
So this one's all about giving individuals a voice, right?
Okay.
Instead of using those problem behaviors.
I love it already. Okay.
So we're teaching more appropriate ways to communicate.
Okay.
Their needs, their desires, what's going on for them.
Okay, so instead of a meltdown, it's, excuse me, I need a break, please.
That's it. Yes. You're giving them the words.
I love that.
Yeah.
To use instead of those more challenging behavior.
So powerful.
Right. And I love the example that Cooper gives in the chapter.
What was it?
About these students who learned to use a speech-generating device.
Oh, wow.
To request items instead of having those disruptive behaviors that they were doing before.
Wow.
So it's about giving them those tools.
That's incredible.
Right, to effectively communicate.
Yeah, it really highlights how important it is to meet people where they are.
Absolutely.
When it comes to communication.
Yes, 100%.
And, like, provide that support they need to be heard and understood.
And it goes back to what we were talking about with those functions of behavior, right? Like,
yes.
Often the behavior is a form of communication.
Yeah.
It's just not an effective one or an appropriate one.
Right. And we label it as, like, bad behavior or challenging behavior.
Right.
But really, it's communication.
It is. It's them trying to tell us something.
Right.
And so FCT is about giving them a more effective way to get that message across.
Mm-hmm.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And like any of these interventions that we're talking about, I'm sure consistency and generalization are really important
100%.
to make this work.
Yeah, it has to be something that we're doing across different environments with different people in their lives for it to really, like, stick, you know?
It takes a village, I guess.
It really does. It takes a village. It takes a team.
Yeah.
It takes everybody being on board to make it happen.
So important.
And also, you know, with FCT especially, it's super important to make sure that we're being really thoughtful and ethical.
Yeah, because I could see that being a challenge, right? With something like this. What are some of the potential, I don't know, like challenges or considerations that we should be aware of?
That's a great question. So one of the things to remember is that FCT often involves extinction.
What does that mean?
So extinction is when we're no longer reinforcing that problem behavior.
Okay, so we're ignoring it, basically.
Kinda, but at the same time, we're teaching that new way to communicate. Right.
And we're reinforcing that really strongly. So it's not just ignoring. It's like a two-pronged approach.
Okay.
But what can happen is that when we first start doing extinction, the behavior might actually get a little bit worse.
Oh, no, really? Why?
Yeah, it's called an extinction burst.
An extinction burst?
Yeah.
That sounds intense.
It can be, because it's like, imagine you're used to doing something a certain way.
Yeah.
And it's always worked for you.
Right.
And then all of a sudden it's not working anymore. And you're like, what's going on?
This is frustrating.
Right.
This isn't fair.
Exactly. So you might try harder. You might get louder.
Right.
You might do it more intensely because you're like, I need this to work.
I need someone to pay attention.
Exactly. Exactly. So that's the extinction burst.
Okay. So how do we deal with that?
So it's really important to just ride the wave.
Okay.
Like, we know is probably going to happen.
Go.
And it's not that we're giving in.
It's that we're just like, okay, we're going to be consistent.
Right. We're going to weather the storm.
Exactly.
And come out on the other side.
And it will pass. It will pass, I promise.
Okay.
But it's just, it can be tricky.
Right.
Especially if we're not expecting it. Right?
Yeah. Or if we don't have the support or the tools to know how to deal with it.
Exactly.
So knowing about it ahead of time is really, really helpful.
Absolutely.
So thank you.
Yeah. And then another thing with FCT is making sure that everybody's on the same page, right?
Right. Consistency.
Consistency is key with all of these.
Totally.
But especially with FCT. If we're not consistent, then the behavior can actually get more resistant to change.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
Because it's confusing for the person.
Right.
They're like, sometimes this works, sometimes it doesn't work.
Yeah, mixed messages.
Exactly. It's like, what am I supposed to do?
Okay. So consistency is key. We've got to be prepared for that extinction burst.
Yes.
Make sure that we have that support in place to be able to do it consistently.
And then celebrate those successes.
Oh, yeah.
Because when FCT works, it's amazing.
Okay, so we've covered 3 very powerful function-based interventions.
Yes.
NCR, High P, and FCT.
Yes.
Those are good ones.
Those are big ones.
But what about those default interventions that we were talking about earlier?
Right.
Are those more like quick fixes, or is there more to them than meets the eye?
They're not just quick fixes. They can be very powerful. Don't underestimate the power of just making a change to the environment.
Okay.
Because sometimes it's not about changing the person, it's about changing the context.
Okay.
And that's where those default interventions come in. They can be really, really effective.
Interesting.
In creating like these immediate shifts in behavior.
Okay, I'm very curious about this.
Yeah, they're cool. We'll talk about those next time.
All right, so default antecedent interventions.
Yes.
They sound kind of, I don't know.
A little deceptively simple.
Yeah, a little bit. Like, could adjusting the environment really make that much of a difference?
You would be so surprised. It's like sometimes it's not about changing the person. It's about changing, like, the context they're in.
Right.
And that's where these default interventions really come in.
So less about deep analysis.
Sometimes, yeah.
More about, like, just strategic tweaking, which I like.
Strategic tweaking. I love that. Yeah.
So what kind of tweaking are we talking about here?
So Kupel talks about 3 main types of default interventions. Antecedent exercise, enriched environment, and then, of course, we have restraint. Which always comes with, like, its own set of considerations.
Right, of course. Okay, so let's start with something a little,
a little lighter.
Yeah, a little lighter.
Yeah.
Antecedent exercise.
Yes.
Is it as simple as it sounds?
It really is. It's basically the idea that, physical activity can be like this, like, pressure release valve. Especially when we're talking about behaviors that might be fueled by, like, pent-up energy. Frustration.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
Like, even for me, if I'm feeling restless or whatever, a good walk or run, like, does wonders for my mood, my focus, everything.
Absolutely. And the research really backs this up. Like, Cooper talks about this study where they had kids with autism jog, like, for a little bit before they did these academic sessions. And it significantly reduced, like, those self-stimulatory behaviors.
Oh, wow.
Even more so than just walking.
Interesting. Jogging versus walking.
Yeah. So it seems like there's something about the intensity there.
Huh. Like, I wonder what it is about that makes a difference.
Right. Like, what is it about that a more intense movement?
Yeah.
But it just goes to show that, like, even those small tweaks can have a ripple effect.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, it makes you wonder if we're not incorporating enough movement and sensory breaks, like, into our schools, our workplaces.
Yes, 100%.
Like, is that part of the problem? I don't know.
It's a good question to think about.
It really is.
And speaking of environments, that kind of leads us into our next default intervention, enriched environment.
Okay. E.
Yeah. We'll call it E for short.
Okay. So E.
Yes.
It sounds like we're about to, like, pamper our way to better behavior.
Right. A little bit.
Tell me more about this. I'm very intrigued.
Okay. So think of it this way. If someone's world is full of engaging, rewarding activities, there's less motivation to act out, right?
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Because they're already getting what they need.
Exactly. They're already getting that fulfillment.
Right.
So it's about creating an environment that is so rich with that positive reinforcement that there's just less room for those unwanted behaviors.
Less room for the chaos.
Exactly.
Okay. I like it.
And the key is to make sure that we're tailoring it, right?
Right.
It's not just about keeping busy.
Right.
It's about making sure that these are activities that the individual is actually interested in.
Right. That they enjoy.
Yeah. Where they feel that sense of, like, this is meaningful to me.
Oh, that's such a good point.
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes we forget about that.
Yes, absolutely.
We just think, like, oh, as long as they're busy, it's fine.
Right. Exactly.
But that's not really what it's about.
No, it's about that engagement.
Yes.
And that feeling of, like, this is my jam.
It reminds me, too, about, like, choice and autonomy and how important that is.
Oh, 100%.
Like having a say in what you're doing in your environment.
Yes. And, that sense of control can be huge.
Right,
We're talking about preventing behaviors that stem from feeling powerless.
Totally. Yeah.
Or frustrated.
Yeah. I have no control. I'm going to act out.
Exactly. I need to, like, take control back in some way.
Right.
And so giving them those choices, giving them that autonomy can really head that off at the pass.
Yeah. It's all about that proactive, like we keep saying.
Exactly.
Stage management.
Yes. Setting the stage.
And Cooper talks about, like, how enriched environments have been used successfully, like, with children with disabilities.
Yeah, absolutely.
To reduce problem behaviors.
Yeah, there was that one study where, like, just making sure that they had access to their favorite things and activities throughout the day led to a big decrease in those problem behaviors.
That's really cool.
So again, sometimes it's not about, like, fixing the person. It's just about creating an environment where they can be successful.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's a really good way to put it. Okay, so we've covered kind of the feel-good interventions.
We have, yeah.
It's time to address the kind of elephant in the room a little bit.
Yeah.
Which is restraint.
Restraint.
And I know this is something that, like, we want to tread carefully with.
Yes, absolutely.
Because it's something that I don't know, it just comes with a lot of baggage for a lot of people.
It does. It comes with a history, right?
Right.
So it's definitely something that should only ever be used as a last resort.
Of course, yes.
And only in very specific situations, and always, always with proper training.
Yes.
Oversight.
Accountability.
Accountability, yes. All of that is so important.
So when we talk about restraint, like as an antecedent intervention, what do we actually mean?
So Cooper talks about like 3 main types.
Yeah.
So we have like personal restraint,
okay,
protective equipment restraint,
okay,
and then self-restraint, which is kind of an interesting one.
That is interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's break those down a little bit.
Okay.
Starting with, like, I guess the more, I don't know, the more obvious one.
Right.
Personal restraint.
Right. Okay.
We're talking about like situations where there's an imminent risk of harm.
Right.
Right.
Absolutely.
Not just like a way to control behavior in general.
Right. It's not about compliance. It's about safety.
Exactly. Yes.
So personal restraint is when we have like a trained caregiver
okay,
who is physically preventing someone from engaging in a behavior that is dangerous.
Right.
Right. So it's a very temporary last resort type of measure.
Right. And then there's protective equipment restraint.
Yes. So that's more about like minimizing harm.
Right.
Rather than like completely restricting movement.
Right. Like preventing injury.
Exactly. Yeah. So think like helmets, arm splints, padded mitts.
Right.
Things that are going to protect the individual from injuring themselves.
Right. So less about restriction, more about harm reduction.
Exactly.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah. And Cooper actually gives an example of a case where like oven mitts were used.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. To reduce like chronic hand mouthing.
Interesting. Oh.
So again, it's not about like, we're going to stop you from doing this.
Right.
It's like, we're going to make sure you're safe while you're doing this.
Right. Okay.
And then self-restraint. That one's always super interesting to me.
Self-restraint. Yeah, that's like, how do you...
I know, right? It's like the brain, it figures it out.
Yeah, it's like your brain being like, nope, we're not doing that.
Exactly. Like, we're going to stop ourselves.
It's like the brain's way of hitting the brakes.
Yeah.
On autopilot.
Exactly. Like, we're going to intervene on ourselves. And Cooper, he talks about this case study of this young girl with Down syndrome who learned to self-restrain during these episodes where she would engage in self-injurious behavior.
Wow.
She would literally, like, sit on her hands or, like, tuck her arms into her clothing to prevent herself from, like, causing harm.
That's incredible. Like, the awareness there.
Right.
To be able to do that.
Yeah. It's like the brain is so amazing.
It really is.
In its ability to, like, adapt and learn.
Yeah, and change, even when it's something that's so, I don't know.
Ingrained.
Yeah, like ingrained or like maybe even feels, I don't want to say out of control, but like,
right.
It's just really remarkable.
It is remarkable.
That we have that capacity.
But it also makes you think, like, what's going on there, right? Right. Like, is it truly a replacement behavior?
Okay.
Or is it a way of, like, escaping from, like, overwhelming sensory input?
Okay.
Or, like, emotional distress?
Right. So it's not, we can't just look at the behavior and be like, oh, it's gone. Great.
Exactly.
We have to understand, like, why.
Yes.
What's the why behind it?
Right, exactly, because that's going to tell us so much more than just the behavior itself.
100%. And I think that's an important point to emphasize about, like, all antecedent interventions, really, is that they're not, like, a one-size-fits-all.
Right.
You know?
Okay.
What works for one person might not work for another.
Of course, of course.
And even what works in one situation for a person might not work in another situation.
Totally makes sense.
Right. So it's about finding those right tools.
Yes.
For that particular person.
And being willing to, like, experiment and try different things.
Absolutely. Like, sometimes it is trial and error to figure out what's going to work. And I'm sure, like, you know, we always say this, but especially with things like restraint and stuff.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Like, the ethics of all of this are so important.
Ethics are huge.
Because there's such a fine line, I think, between, like, supporting someone and then, like, inadvertently kind of, I don't know.
Limiting their freedom.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Like taking away their autonomy. And we don't want to do that.
No, never.
So it's a lot to think about, but I think these are like really, really valuable tools. And I'm so glad we got to kind of like unpack this.
Me too. I love how Cooper, he gives such practical examples in this chapter.
Yes.
Because it makes it so much easier to like visualize.
Yes.
And be like, okay, I can see how I could use that.
Yes. 100%.
So I hope our listeners are feeling that way too.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
Like they're walking away with some new things to try.
Totally. And I have a feeling that we're only just scratching the surface.
Oh, yeah.
With all of this.
We could talk about this for days.
Oh, easily. Easily.
But hopefully this at least gives people a good foundation to kind of understand like what antecedent interventions are, the power that they have, and how we can use them to like really create positive change.
Absolutely. It's been super eye-opening, even for me.
Good, good.
You know, and it's got me thinking about like my own life and the environments that I'm a part of, you know.
Yeah, like what comes to mind?
I don't know. It's just like making me rethink how I set up my workspace.
Okay.
How I make my to-do list.
Okay.
Even like how I'm interacting with my family.
Right.
When like everyone's stressed out.
Yeah.
You know, it's like these principles.
They're everywhere.
Everywhere.
Once you start to see them.
Yes. It's like this hidden world. That's been there all along.
And that's what I love about like learning about this stuff is that it gives you this whole new lens to look at the world.
Yes, I love that.
And to understand behavior. And it's not just about like those clinical settings, you know?
Right. It's about our everyday lives.
It's our everyday lives.
That's how we show up in the world.
Yes. How we create those environments that support us, that support the people around us.
I love that.
And it's really empowering when you think about it.
It is empowering because it's like we're not just at the mercy of our circumstances.
Right. Exactly.
Like we have tools.
We have choices.
To shape our experiences.
Yes. And to create those environments that are going to help us to be successful.
I love that message.
Yeah.
That's a good one to end on, I think.
Yeah. So keep those minds curious out there.
Yes.
And we will see you on the next deep dive.